Yossi, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Charles, for hosting me again. I remember our last meeting at Oxford. I think it was in St. Anthony's. There were like ventilators behind me because it was like 40 degrees. And today I'm freezing, so just to show you that things can change. The topic that you have in front of you, and this should be a kind of a long discussion, is Israel and Anti-Zionism Part 1. We have seen, and I was taking notes, since the beginning of the seminar, the emphasis was on anti-Semitism in its variety of manners, with Charles' introductory remarks, which were mostly some historical but also contemporary within the structural shifts which are taking place in global affairs. We heard lectures pertaining to the seeds of anti-Jewishness and anti-Semitism. We heard on the issue of Nazi Germany. And basically, the discussion has been on anti-Semitism and the legacy of anti-Semitism in two major contexts. I will try to put it as I was thinking about it in the last, from yesterday. One was the historical context of the loss of sovereignty, of Jewish sovereignty in the ancient times. There were two dimensions to Jewish sovereignty, perhaps one in the First Temple era, which ended up with the collapse of the First Temple and the exilic moment of Babylon in the 6th century BC. And that kind of like shifted the whole idea of the Israelites into the Jewish people and their relations to their God and to the idea of monotheism, which was created not only God as one God, but God of history, which has to be explained. It's not that it's a one God that monotheism was all about, but the good sense of the Jews was that here, our God is dictating history. He is conducting history, and therefore he can restore us. If it will be in 70 years, in Jeremiah, and so on, there will be a story. There is a storytelling about the world, and the storytelling about the world was that the world is moving via the agency of the Jews in its relations with God, and the corrective notion of God restoring its people to its land was essential in this story, and also in the story of minorities. You know, the Babylonians restoring the Jews to their land is a very interesting story of allowing the people of Israel to come back and basically settle in their patrimony from God. And Ezra and Nehemiah's return is an essential story about also creating the people in this different fashion and separating the people and creating the precepts of Judaism into the people and discovery of the scripture and so on, all of the stories that we have, of course, historically speaking. And then, of course, one has to understand that the Jewish return to their motherland or to the patrimony after the exilic moment, and prior to that, of course, the separation between Israel and Judea, the collapse of Israel with the Assyrians in the 8th century BC, which kind of led to the dismantling of the brotherhood and the kinship ties, which were prior to that during the Solomonic or Davidic kingdom. What we had is the Judea experiment restored in a different fashion. The Jews coming back to the patrimony were not an independent sovereign nation. They were an outpost of the Persians. They had kind of an autonomy. The building of the temple and the Judaic kind of like notion of practicing of the temple, the sacrifice in the temple, the Kohen, the tafkid of the role of the Kohanim, is a major issue of the Jewish history that was without really any statehood, because they were part, of course, and Ezra and Nehemiah, of course, were, as they would say today, working for the Persian, for the Persian state, going back and forth. Read Ezra, how many trips he takes, and basically serving the Persian state initially, but they're creating a kind of like a cultural autonomy, which became, of course, subscribed later on to Alexander the Great, and eventually what we have, and this is a very quick kind of like tour, eventually restoring their own sovereignty during the Maccabee period, which in the 2nd century BC all the way to the Herod period. And therefore, Jewish sovereignty and the notion of Jewish sovereignty becoming an important factor in Jewish history. And when Ben-Gurion is creating the State of Israel as the founding father, constantly harking back, every member of the Israeli IDF got a small booklet talking about Yehud, our kind of like journey and our mission. And this was like to restore the glory of sovereignty as opposed to the downfall of exile. Exile is the key factor in the psyche of the Jews. That is, that as some scholars would have put it, sort of like the Jews were always a cyclical kind of like, we restore sovereignty and we collapse, and God will restore us because we have sinned against God. We have relations with the Almighty. The Almighty is operating in history, and therefore is the historical God. And the historical God is bringing us back, and the restoration during the Hashmonai period is in the classical case of the Jews restoring themselves, building the temple, albeit with all kind of like relations with their neighbors. There is also geopolitical that you heard yesterday from my good friend Uzi. We spoke about over dinner, Uzi and Charles. So like the geopolitics was always very much present also. To what extent we affect geopolitics. The idea of the Jews also dispersing in diaspora becoming very critical from day one. That is, when the exilic moment arrives, the Jews are not only exiled from their motherland and to be restored, but they're also, the question is, to what extent there is any normality about dwelling among the others. Not only being a nation and a state as a congruent concept, two people, the people and the land together governing themselves, but also to what extent they define others by dwelling among the foreigners. And they've been dwelling among the foreigners for ages. In fact, they were critical players in the region, and therefore when we have a revolt eventually against the Romans, what we have, it's the diaspora revolt in 117, 118 AD. This is the diaspora revolt against the Romans, which predated the later revolt of Bar Kokhba against the Romans after the destruction of the Second Temple. Always there is this story of exilic moment and diaspora. How much it's diaspora is the natural term. So this is a new kind of like a regular life. You live among the others, while exile is the failure to consolidate your sovereignty in the land given to you by God, the patrimony, and operating as a realpolitik, as a state, as a sovereign state within the system. This is a very important understanding also, of course, of Zionism in that sense, because the notion of normality, of residing normality among the other nation is a big question. After the collapse of the Second Temple, and after the abysmal failure to revolt against the Romans, which was not such an abysmal, if you look at it, the Jews revolted against the Romans in 133-35 AD. In what has been the most incredible challenge to the Romans ever. This is how Roman historians are describing it. The Romans could barely defeat this revolt. Have to bring soldiers, from where? From Great Britain. All the way from Great Britain to suppress the revolt that took place by Bar Kokhba. And indeed, after that, we are entering a period in Jewish history where the question is discussed oftentimes of anti-Semitism, albeit I would say that already in the time of Herod and his son, the successor to Herod, Agrippa I, which was still governing in a kind of like a short sovereign period in Jerusalem, 4 years sovereignty in Jerusalem, which is the 1st century AD. Prior to the collapse of the temple in 70 AD, we had a short period of Agrippa I, a very powerful period because of his relations with the leadership in Rome, with Claudius and Caligula, and he was raised there. And you see, when there are questions pertaining to the Jews of Alexandria, massive community in Alexandria, and the massive community of Alexandria is perceived by the Roman kind of like as people who do not subscribe to the culture, the major culture. And when they are being attacked, Agrippa is coming to their savior, just like the state of Israel will come to save the diaspora Jewry today, and parading in Alexandria. And when Agrippa goes back, there are praot, there are pogroms in Alexandria, and women are raped, and people are forced to eat ochel lo kasher, non-kosher food, as a way of punishing. And this is, to some, kind of manifestations of anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter how we define it, but certainly the issue of dwelling among the others. Eventually, of course, and we heard about that, the Jews have become the significant or insignificant other for the Christians. The time of Christianity and the rise of Christianity and the idea that the Jews are no longer can recover the sovereignty because they did not accept Jesus. And therefore, they have been there as a sign of what happened in the past. But the Christians are taking over. It's not Yehudische Babasar. It's not the Jew in the flesh. And the flesh means circumcision. It's Yehudische Baruch, is the spirit of Jesus. This is why it's kind of like a global idea of Judaism. This is what Jesus, like we always like to say Jesus was born Jewish and was raised Jewish and died Jewish. This is the idea. But this is the new this is the new selection. And the new selection, it was all its theology, made the Jews the significant one that until in the initial time was the dictum, which was very much an important dictum for the Jews. And maybe I'll read it. This is a very important dictum for the Jews. This is, I don't want to waste time, but maybe I'll find it. If I not find it, I'll move on. All the idea of the substitute theory of Augustine. In any case, when Augustine had the whole idea of the dictum, al tehargum, do not kill them. Do not kill them means keep them as remnant of what happened in the past. And do not kill them is we keep them out there. They are not selected anymore. We are selected, the Christian. There is a replacement theology, the whole replacement theology. And do not kill them will subscribe also to the defense of the Jews by the popes. The popes were the defenders of the Jews against anti-Semitism of sorts. Because they're kind of like until, and there are lots of scholarship about how the popes needed them sort of to show where we came from, so to speak. Until this is exploding in the 11th to the 12th century. And in the 11th, the 12th century, they become dispensable. And we don't have any more need for them. And anti-Semitism, we heard from our friend, the French scholar, where is he? Joel. Yoel. And we know sort of like Yoel had this whole thing. I don't want to get into scholarly debates about this evolution after the idea of, you said, from anti-Semitism to anti-Jewish. But certainly there is a new phase of the Jews who are dispersed all over, and we don't want to get, I deal with it on hundreds of pages in my book, what happened in the lack of sovereignty. And the lack of sovereignty is, of course, the Jews are insignificant in world affairs, so to speak. Really, we don't have even good history about it. If you think about it, the Jews have never wrote history. They never wrote history. Until the 19th century, there is no Jewish history. From Josephus Flavius until the 19th century, not even one single book of Jewish history. There is a new phase. The phase, of course, is the Jews and halakha. Creating halakha is a sense of preserving the community, in the absence of sovereignty. To some extent, sovereignty became the nemesis of Jewish existence. Every time we had sovereignty, we led to calamity. Sovereignty led to calamity, to almost total destruction. So basically, the religious practices, the communal practices of religiosity, of tradition, so on, which has been developed all the way that even God was studying the Torah. This notion of the Jews in exile, but do not consider sovereignty as a mission, because sovereignty will come only in the redemptive moment, in a Geulah. And Geulah comes only from God. Will become an issue at stake also in modernity, in the debate between ultra-Orthodox Jews who are considering Zionism as basically predating the real arrival of the Messiah. Because the Jews, the Zionists, will become active in history by the ultra-Orthodox kind of awaiting for the Messiah to come. Awaiting for the Messiah. And for the Zionists to interpret modernity as an issue, sort of like we have to be active as a nation, a modern nation, was perceived by the big rabbis of the ultra-Orthodox as something which was, it was against kind of the course of history, and perhaps will destroy the Jews as they are, of course, because of also modernity. Soloveitchik eventually had this whole idea of Kol Dodi Dofek, the very, very big book that Soloveitchik wrote, My Uncle is Knocking. That is, God is knocking on history, and the Zionists were listening and were moving and creating the state of Israel. While the ultra-Orthodox, and this is a diatribe kind of against the ultra-Orthodox, were not listening. You were sinners against God because you were thinking that God will come by himself after the Holocaust. And he said, God was knocking in Majdanek, and God was knocking in the United Nations, and you were not listening. And the same theology will be propagated eventually in a different fashion by Rabbi Kook, who were kind of like hosting the notion of the religious Zionist, while the heroes of the IDF for him are the Kedoshim, as he wrote about them. Those who are fighting to bring it. It's not a matter of religiosity, it's to restore sovereignty. So the whole issue of sovereignty is becoming the biggest issue, because anti-Zionism is becoming the nemesis of the Jews, notwithstanding their desires to be part and parcel of other nations, perhaps. And their desires, varying from place to place, manifested itself in variety of fashion, either because of opportunities presented to them. Van Dam, in all his essay, presented them in a variety of fashion, from the 17th century on, and presented to them. And if you look at the history of German Jews and the Bildung, when you have like in 1795, the Jews are the poorest community in Germany. In 1870, according to the scholars, the Jews are the richest community in Germany. So there's some transformation of modernity coming, and it relates to what we know about calling emancipation. Modernity brings back the Jews to the world as players in the world. They were, of course, interpreted as enemies here and there in history, and we already heard here on Christianity, and of course the idea of the Jews playing a role in the minds of others, and of course is in the emergence of Protestantism and how it was perceived. But I'm talking about modernity as the Jews are moving into the world. If it's in Germany, if it's in France, we know the Dreyfus affair, which we will talk about. If eventually it will be in North America, and the vast majority of the Jews, of course, will be residing in the Russian Empire. By the late 19th century, before the massive migration to America, remember, 7 million Jews were residing in Russia, in the Russian Empire. It was all, it's 7 million. In the beginning of the 19th century, there were only 1 million. So there were also, because of new medicine or the issues of water, well, it doesn't matter. The Jews really were growing in terms of numbers. And of course, there are issues pertaining to Jewish theology that evolved all these years. Jewish theology, which had yearnings for the land, which had different yearnings, which had false messiah. With all the Jewish history, we cannot do it on one leg. But it's important to understand the hatreds of the Jews, of the Christians, which was theologically manifested and was oriented toward the Jews as the significant other, with variation, even in this country, of course. When the Jews are being restored to England after being expelled in the 12th century, and they're being restored because of the vision of Cromwell, that we have to rebuild. And this is also the notion after the 30-year war in Westphalia. How do we build new state? This was a Christian peace. I wrote a whole work on sovereignty in Europe and Christian peace. How come Christian peace suddenly have the Jews all the time mentioned in Christian peace? Because the only model was the ancient Jewish state. The sovereignty of the Jewish state was there. So they wanted, and indeed for the Christians, especially for those who consider the theology that we are building a model of the new Jerusalem in variety of manners. And the Jews, even the idea of Jews being restored to their land, will be a sign of the new redemption, the second coming of Christ. And this is until today sort of like the ideology that informs evangelicals. When Donald Trump comes to Jerusalem and inaugurate the new embassy of the Americans in Jerusalem, and being called by the Prime Minister at the time and now, Netanyahu, Cyrus, you're the Cyrus, you're kind of restored. The main list of guests were evangelicals. They didn't like liberal Jews coming. They didn't like. Because liberal Jews kind of like assimilationist. But the allies, as they are defined, and I was present in the definition, where these are the people who are like kind of like understand the gravity of Jewish sovereignty. Anti-Zionism, of course, becoming a disease, despite the idea that Christianity is subsiding, that there is no death of Christianity, God is not dead, notwithstanding Nietzsche. But certainly the questions which were emerging in modernity regarding the Jews were completely different questions as I described them at length, with Penzler and other scholars. First of all, the economic Jew. The role of the economic Jew. The Jew as a social deviant. And eventually, of course, the threats of the Jews in emancipation. Emancipation as a way of allowing the Jews to be part and parcel of citizenship. We are all citizens, and France is the key. From the time that Napoleon is enshrining emancipation in the country he occupies, there are already warnings. Think about it. Already in 1808, the Catholic leadership come to Napoleon and warning him about granting emancipation. But he granted emancipation. What he does is basically creating the consistoire. Consistoire is the Jewish ethnic leadership to basically report about the Jews, notwithstanding the fact that they're like all other citizens. But let's keep them there because you never know how treasonous they will be. They have these tendencies. And that was the consistoire by Napoleon himself. When Napoleon is imposing, I must read it to you, it's fascinating. when Napoleon when Napoleon is imposing the emancipation of the countries he occupied, including in Poland, he gets a letter. Let me just find it for you. Leave it. He gets a letter from the Jewish community in Warsaw, and they appeal to his emissary and say, we cannot, because once you are emancipated, you become a full-fledged citizen, regular citizen. So the big question is, you start to recruit the Jews to the military. I'm not talking about the Russians imposing recruitment and stealing the Jews in order to convert them, but you have to, and they write, the ultra-Orthodox community, don't take us, we are incapable of being soldiers. And he delays, and I have these letters, I found these letters, amazing letters. He delays the whole idea of recruiting the Jews, and they pay money, they pay lots of zlotys to because they said, don't take us, because once you go to the military, you are assimilated, you're part, you're becoming, it's very tough to maintain the community of the halachic life. And this is a big issue. While modernity comes, and later on, the Jews were eager to participate in the German army, eager to show their loyalty to the state of Germany, eager to show that only by shedding blood we can share blood. Blood shed is blood shared. And Hermann Cohen, as much as he is kind of a liberal Jew in the 20th century talking about the Jewish and morality and so on, once Germany is going into World War I, eager to send the Jews into the army. Because only like that we will die for our motherland, Germany, that no one will suspect that we are disloyal. Disloyalty becoming a critical issue of anti-Semitism. Are there a fifth column? And when the Russians are moving, they are very suspicious of the Jews, their own Jews. And when the Germans are moving, they are suspicious of the same Jews. And all of them burn the Jews eventually, one way or another. Because of other charges, that they are kind of a sect of sorts. And this is even before kind of like we're thinking about other issues of economy. Think about Karl Marx on the Jewish question. Karl Marx on the Jewish question. How the Jews represent the bourgeoisie, the disease of money. All kind of twisted from the Christian kind of like understanding of anti-Semitism. Zionism was the panacea of all of this. Herzl, who is the genius, who looks at this and say, if it's the Dreyfus trial and so on, and say, look what's gone on here. Notwithstanding our desire to assimilate, to be part of the French, of the German, notwithstanding our, whatever we do, they will hate us, so to speak. And the hatred doesn't mean if it's Christian hatred, modern hatred, this hatred, and so we have to be moving in a different direction. And their Zionism was all about the idea that otherness cannot provide you power. You're completely powerless. You're totally susceptible. You're unaccepted, even you are completely loyal, and you create the culture of the countries in which you dwell. In that respect, many people among the Jews were the first anti-Zionists, including in this country. Montagu, the minister. People in England were leery when Balfour granted the recognition of Zionism and the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Because they said, we are members of Britain. How could you say, that we have another place to dwell? Our mother country is Britain. It's not elsewhere. So there's always this fear. Who do you belong to? And this fear was a main motivator for Zionists, while the promised land, in fact, during this time was not just Jerusalem, was America. America emerged as the promised land of the Jews in the late 19th century all the way to the early parts of the 20th century. From 1982, from the pogroms, from 1882, excuse me, to 1924, and Judith Barsky is here, can tell us more. American Jewry grew from 250,000 to almost 5.5 million, with 4 million moving from the Pale of Settlement. This is mind-boggling. America could provide safe haven. In America, Jews could be an ethnic group. They could practice their religiosity in an American fashion. What Will Herberg would write eventually, the book, The Triple Melting Pot, how American Jews, Christian, and Catholics are all adopting America as part of their creed. So you're Reform and conservative, but you're American. There is no contradiction. In fact, we are, and eventually become Judeo-Christian tradition. And America is a safe haven. There is no attacks on the Jews. The Jews are not singled out, albeit there are groups who are still Ku Klux Klan, whatever, but this is a disease that will be solving itself. And opportunities provide themselves. They can be Jewish, they can be safe, and they can be forward-looking mentality. And therefore, when Brandeis is taking over the Zionist organization in America, just before he's becoming the Supreme Court judge in America, he says that to be a good Jew is to be a good American, and to be a good American, or to be a good Jew is to be a good American is to be a good Jew, and to be a good Jew is to be a Zionist. Here we find it. We are in the triple beautiful. You can be a Zionist, kind of a diasporic approach, you can love, but Israel and Palestine will be something which will be a minor experiment. Even when our Lozorov is traveling to America in the 1920s, he kind of writes 20 essays, massive essay. Our Lozorov was murdered later on, about America, almost like de Tocqueville writing on America. Our Lozorov writes about the Jews in America. Look at this. The Golden Medina, the Golden State, have solved our issues. Issues of security, issues of practicing our identity. No, this is really the modernity at its best, because we found a country which is not ethnically based. It's the idea of the very idea of the melting pot. Even the notion of the melting pot, an idea. You know who invented the notion of melting pot in America?
Glazer.
Who?
Glazer.
No. Israel Zangwill, the Zionist activist. He wrote a play, The Melting Pot, celebrating his life in America. And the president of America sitting in the crowd saying, "Thank you, Mr. Zangwill," from the balcony, for representing America. The ideal of America is the ideal of the Jews. Here we are. And Zangwill was the one who was also looking for Uganda as a solution, with Herzl himself. So you see, America was like, and now when Charles is talking about anti-Semitism on campuses and the awakening of anti-Semitism, BDS, different story. Zionism will emerge eventually as the solution for Jews who cannot go to America. But when Zionism triumphed, and we began with 600,000 Jews in Palestine, this is quite remarkable. In 75 years, the Israeli century has been created, where the vast majority of the Jews now reside in Israel, and Israel no longer looks to the uncle of America, but the uncle of America often looks to the uncle from Tel Aviv. Quite an amazing journey. And the startup nation, and the fact that what I write about, how the Jews supposed to be global only when they live without power. Jewish power become most important. What distinguishes Zionism from anything else, the Jewish power. Those who rise to kill you, we kill them. We change Jewish morality. We no longer think about Jewish morality as universal morality. Realpolitik. They come to kill us, we kill them. They come to our borders, we do what we need to do. We think like a sovereign state. Sovereignty informs everything. And sovereignty in form of everything, it doesn't mean that we become pedestrian and just like people who are raising oranges and so on, as we did in the beginning. We can also be global, which is a genius. We can be the high-tech nation that travel all over the world, including to Palo Alto, to build America and to be second on NASDAQ. And at the same time, we can be warriors. What an achievement. The most triumphant moment in Jewish history. A Jewish state, Jewish sovereignty, that everybody who hates us, so they hate us. Israel didn't deal even with anti-Semitism to work itself out. How it will work itself out? Abraham Accords. Basically, they see how strong we are. They don't sign peace deal with us, as Uzi will say, because we are weak. They sign peace deal with us because we bring technology, we bring doctors, we bring innovation, we bring security, and we can even defeat Iran. What else you need? And we defeated the Arab state who wanted to kill us, and we killed them instead. Exactly like that. So anti-Semitism is becoming kind of like remnants of anti-Semitism, becoming, of course, the diaspora relations of the Jews as a minority here and there. You know, they're hated, they're here and there. In Paris, with the Muslims coming, in Islamic jihadists here, they are hated because of some Christian right remaining. You name it. All kind of variation. Or because of just different, whatever it is, but just biases. We have a psychologist here. All kind of hatreds can be in other countries. But Israel, as a bastion of power, how can it be hated? So of course there were Soviet Jewry issues and Soviet anti-Semitism. We have a scholar about that, and the Jews, of course, managed to let my people go, and Sharansky is part of ISGAP. We had all movements. I cannot give you everything. But basically, Israel is the security of Israel. And when Israel will be strong, the Jews will be strong, especially since there is a law of return and every Jew can come to Israel. Eventually, there is a safe haven. So you may have some crazy guys like Corbyn in this country and suddenly hate the Jews. You know, the Jews can tell stories about themselves. What is anti-Semitism? Hating the Jews more than necessary. These are Jewish jokes. But Corbyn suddenly becomes, and he hates the Jews much more than necessary. He's like visceral. It's like hatred of Jews. I met with the labor leadership just 2 weeks ago in Jerusalem. They came to, I had dinner with them, we talked, and they are completely different labor leadership, trying really to speak in a different fashion and about shame about what happened with Corbyn and this kind of type of anti-Semitism. I don't say it will not rise again in different fashion. And we see. And that affects the Jews. The Jews who are dwelling, but the number of Jews who are dwelling among, not in Israel, has dwindled. In England, for example, we are numbering today at 290,000 at best. In France, we are at 400,000 at best, with many of them are Boeing Aliyah, 1 foot in Israel, 1 foot in France. America, of course, remains the largest segment of Jewry that outside Israel, different numbers. According to the American Jewish Committee, 5.4 million, and so on. And of course, Russian Jews, Ukrainian Jews, are all coming to Israel. This is the land that is always open. Calamity will befall. In France, we are coming. Calamity will be kind of present itself, we're coming. So the Zionist creed has been indeed safe haven to the Jews. Safe haven to the Jews. With the definition of the Jews as the Jews were defined in modernity. Why? Because the Jews in modernity were no longer defined as religious Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews. They were defined, as you said before, on a racial base, on an economic base, indistinguishable. So they're Jews. And indeed, the Jews in the diaspora, they don't, you know, if you look at Putnam's book, American Grace, and how Jews are defined in the United States, you see, they're kind of like a much hybrid kind of concept than what it is about, like, what are the Jews? There's so many levels of Jewishness, so to speak, religious-wise, ethnic-wise. Are you celebrating Passover? Are you mentioning Hanukkah? Are you having a trip to Israel? All sorts of things happening. Not all the Jews were happy with the Zionist success. One has to understand. For some, it was, as I said before, was the idea, the Zionist idea of a Jewish state, a modern Jewish state, with a modern Jewish creed, which means the Jews are living in a sovereign state, they're practicing their tradition in a variety of fashion, but it's not a religious state. There is no constitution, there is no separation between state and religion in Israel in a constitutional fashion. So for many of, especially the ultra-Orthodox, were unhappy about it because they saw it as a way, but the Holocaust presented this disaster to the Jews that all of them were wiped out and were perished in the Holocaust. So there was an acceptance of sorts, but gradual acceptance, not acceptance as legitimacy to the Zionist state. Therefore, when Ben-Gurion struck the deal with the ultra-Orthodox and gave them exemption from serving and studying and so on, kind of like for him, as he himself mentioned, was a tourist attraction. Eventually they will dissipate. This cannot bring with modernity anything. This is how Ben-Gurion saw it in his writings. And he said, we cannot yet have a constitution, and the constitution is not yet ready because we are a nation emerging. People will come from all over the place. And indeed, majority of Jews, of course, today of Israel is, I don't know if majority, but large segment of the Jews are coming from Arab and Muslim countries, for whom there was no modernity in the same sense, with the exception perhaps of the Jewry of Algiers, which were they did crémière. They had like the emancipation mode when the French moved to Algiers. The Moroccan Jews did not have that. They were subject of the king. Tunisians had it in a different fashion. But the vast majority of the Jews of the Muslim countries, with some exception of Iraqis, who talked about Iraq, Uzi, did not have modernity introduced to them. And indeed, if you look at an Israeli Jewish, Mizrahi Jews, what we call Sephardic Jews, the continuum is not between secular and religious. It's not between secular and religious. It's rather the degree of religiosity. I'm more religious, less religious, all the way to extreme religious. No one is secular in the sense. You don't see Mizrahi Jews identifying themselves as much in Israel as secular. On the contrary. Traditional has variation. We celebrate, of course, bar mitzvah. We celebrate, we use the official rabbis. We don't go to reform. We don't go conservative. We don't go outside the community at all. But we are religious, but the tradition is what's important. Zionism is triumphant. Has triumphed. Israel has won wars. Israel has consolidated itself. The vast majority of Jews live in Israel. Israel is the fastest growing community in the world in terms of birth rates. We have 3.2 kids per woman, which is quite unbelievable. No OECD country comes close to us. We have been attractive in many countries. We have been conducting ourselves in a fashion that Israel is interesting. We have shades and colors between the gay parade in Tel Aviv, which attracts 200,000, and Jerusalem, the city of religiosity, between modernity and religion. We kind of find this kind of like an attraction of colors, the rainbow Jewishness. And this is where we are now, with the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room. And the elephant is as huge as they come. Because the legacy of exile that the Jews destroyed themselves is constantly being discussed in Israel. Netanyahu's major speech in 2018, will we survive more than 80 years? That's his speech. That's his speech. We never survive more than 75. Will we survive 80 years? And lo and behold, in the last 6 months, Israel is exploding. And all the demons are out. And no one discusses anti-Semitism. But what they discuss in Israel? How we ate ourselves. And it doesn't matter which camp will be. How we ate ourselves. And will we survive? When I read the last week's survey, which drives me nuts, but I read it, 68% of Israelis believe that the civil war is imminent in Israel. They don't deal with anti-Semitism on campuses with Charles. You know what Miami has, and 20% of Jews accepted in where they were accepted once at Yale. I come from Yale, and now 6%. Who the hell cares, Charles? While in Penn, I saw the data that you showed. I know this data. In Penn, it rose, right? Well, look at the data. At the same time, at Penn, we went from 14% to 20%. And 20% is a lot, Charles. The Jewish community in America, 5.4 million out of 330 million. To have 20%, this in itself brings anti-Semitism. Think about it. This in itself, people say, how can it be that there are only a minuscule 1.5% of the population and have 20% in the Ivy League school? We know this story. I remember sitting at Yale in classes. And as an Israeli, I was absolutely unaware of anti-Semitism. I'm telling you, I grew up in a Zionist home with power in mind. You know, I used to look down at those anti-Semitism. These are for those exilic people who didn't come to Palestine to fight like my father in the War of Independence. All my life, kind of like, okay, we can do it. We don't need anyone, we fight. And I remember sitting there, it was like almost in the 19th century, and I remember suddenly a professor says, of economics, you know, it's all because of these Goldbergs and Friedmans and so on who are taking money. And what did it say? And I said, I kind of as an Israeli, I said, excuse me, sir, was this an anti-Semitic remark? And it was quiet in the class. I remember it, I never forget that. And he retracted his claim. I said, I'm an Israeli, I'm not used to it, but if it is, you're an asshole. This is what I said as a student. This is exactly what I said, I swear to God. And the guy, and it was quiet in the class, he said, who is this chutzpah Israeli? Because we grew up believing that we take power in our hands. We grew up believing that all of this language of kind of like timidity, and you know, like I spoke with my friends here in New Zealand this morning about whether we hide our Jewishness or not. We wear it with pride. We won the 6-Day War. We won the 56 War. We won, albeit in 73 War. We went to the war in 80. We go to wars. We don't talk talks. We go to wars. That's how it is. It's power. It's power what defines us. And with power, we can achieve everything, including global presence. And we will have relations with India, and I will travel to Gujarat, and I will travel to China, and I travel to the world. And everybody will open their doors to, I was just in Japan, and say, wow, these Jews are amazing. And when they talk about the Jews, they talk about the Israelis. It's together. They don't separate. Because they think, wow, look at this alliance. And David Bernstein sits here and he knows. And he knows when we were in the, there was a woman here from Azerbaijan. Where is she? Hi. From Turin. I remember Azerbaijanis. We started to, and the AJC, working with Azerbaijan in 1907. And David knows, with the American Jewish Committee. And we did the great work about bringing, and with Israel, weapons. Believe me, we did a great job about kind of bringing to the Azerbaijani. Yoav Gallant just came back from Azerbaijan last week, our defense minister. And I remember Aliyev coming to the AJC office, and my friend tells me, you see, Aliyev stands here in front of the window of the AJC's office, and he sees, I don't know, it was like the Washington Post there, or whatever it is. Remember?
Right next door.
Just right next door. And he looks at this and he said, wow, Israel's so strong. The Jewish Americans control the media. Here's the Washington Post. The Jews are so strong. Here is the alliance. American Jewry and Israeli Jewry, unimpeachable. This is the big alliance of power. They kind of like, and then Walt and Mearsheimer will write the diatribe of anti-Semitism about the Jewish lobby. Look at these guys. They took over America. They took over America and so on. When I wrote my book, Marketing the American Creed Abroad, Huntington was trying to kind of attack me on this, kind of like about Israel, so eventually apologizing. But we, and American Jews, suddenly empowered each other. When Ellen Dershowitz wrote his book, Chutzpah, in 1991, he said, we no longer hide. It's not shande, it's chutzpah. We gotta move on. Why we move on? Because Zionism is on our side. Zionism and the State of Israel showed us what power is all about. And all those people who hate the Jews, so be it. As others will be less polite in saying what so be it is. That's it. America's strategic alliance with Israel is not out of weakness, it's out of fear. Or out of fear. It's rather because we are strong. They saw us. They saw it in the 6-day war. We saw our pilots coming and destroying all the Arab armies in 4 hours. This is a mighty Jew. This is David. We restored David and Goliath. It's not the Jew who is being paraded as in the streets with a sign of enslavement in the Holocaust. God forbid. We have restored the honor of Judaism and Jews in the sovereignty. Sovereignty has been the key for restoring the diseases of anti-Zionism, of anti-Semitism. And of course, there are the biases against Israel. The BDS. And the BDS, and you mentioned Edward Said, and we had when I was a student, Edward Said came and, okay, we don't take it lightly, even though Israel took it lightly. For many years, Israel ignored anti-Semitism. When Begin was speaking to Abe Foxman, the head of the ADL, about Abe Foxman came to Begin when Begin signed the deal with Egypt, the peace treaty with Egypt, and told him, Prime Minister, look at this, you're signing with Egypt. While in Egypt, there are TV series of blood libel against the Jews, of the Jews burning kids. The Jews are doing awful things, and you have to tell them that. Begin told to a Foxman said, it's a bilateral relation, it will work itself out. It will work itself out. And indeed, from time to time, it reappears. It reappears with ISIS, it reappears with the Islamic jihadists, and of course, our big nemesis, the Iranians, who hate us in a visceral fashion. And we have to defeat them. And we said, we will not allow them to have an atomic bomb. Why? Because we're going to bomb them. That's what we said. That's what they say. Therefore, the big elephant in the room is what happened to us. What is the story of Zionism? How can it be that Zionism of the power that we described is going astray and the Jews of Israel are hating each other? This is the big dilemma that everybody's bemoaning painfully. We don't tend to discuss it because we want to hide this, but this cannot be hidden anymore. We are 10 million people. We're no longer the 600,000 who have to fight. Suddenly, we have in Israel a case in point in the last 6-7 months where you see ruptures in society, when you see pilots, when you see warriors who say, if this will not be a democracy, notwithstanding the political debate in Israel, that's what they say. We're not going to be here. While others are saying, if this will not be a state that we want, let's say, a more Jewish state, let's say whatever is religious, we will fight in a different fashion. And they are at each other's throat. I've been witnessing this for quite some time and writing about it. Because these demons have been with us for a long time. But as demons are, they don't always explode. They take their time, they saturate, and suddenly something ignites them and they happened. The last election, perhaps, and I'm not talking about what happened. This is what happened, however. And this explosion is raising many, many questions about the Jewish identity of the Zionist project. What will be the Zionist project? For some in the Knesset, including in the Knesset, when I speak from the podium of the Knesset, the most honorable place for me to stand, as I said in my first speech in the Knesset, I was trembling, I'm telling you. It was so emotional for me to speak. I spoke about the Jewish home, a Bayit HaYisraeli. What is our Bayit? What is our home? And next to the podium on the right, there is the portrait of Herzl, the visionary of Zionism. And when I mention Herzl, a member of the Knesset will tell me, don't mention this guy, he is an assimilationist. An assault on Zionism in the Knesset. And we have an assault on Zionism in Israel as Zionism was constructed. And this is a huge debate inside Israel. And it doesn't matter where you sit. Everybody knows it. And we don't know how it will end. So what is at stake here? What is the question to be asked? The question to be asked is, in the absence in Israel right now, there is also legal question, division of likely between the judiciary, the legislator, the executive, and so on, all those democratic issues that people are discussing. But there's something much more fundamental that people know, they feel it in their bones. It's not by chance that these issues, also ethnicity, Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews, ultra-Orthodox, the religious Zionist, and many streams in the religious Zionists, including the Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the settlements and so on, all of these issues, people understand. These are different schools of thought, and many people already. 10 million people is not a small nation. And what led the melting pot happen in the beginning was, as Ben-Gurion had it, the IDF, the security forces. Because we all knew that we have to defend our country. Notwithstanding our rivalries, we, first of all, have an outside enemy. We have the Arabs, the Arab-Israeli conflict. We have the Palestinian. We have Palestinian terror. We have the nemesis of the BDS. We have all of them. We know when they hate us. And we know how to react. We don't hide the hatred or trying to go down. We fight. But, as Uzi told us yesterday, there were some confusions also on the road. Suddenly, the outside threat is becoming perhaps less pronounced. Iran and the nuclear weapon is okay. I mean, it's an abysmal kind of like scenario of Iran and nuclear weapon. The whole world is going in flames. It's not, as Israel always said, it's not just an Israeli issue. It's the Gulf issue, it's an American issue, it's the European issue. I was in charge of the relation of the Knesset with the European Union. I traveled to Europe all the time in Brussels. I went to Brussels, I meet with the people. And people say, you know, the Europeans are anti-Semitic. I didn't find them anti-Semitic. I don't think they knew even what I was talking about. Once I explained to them, we had like discussions. Some of them had propensities because the Palestinians have their own theories about colonialism and so on. So they were trying to drive a wedge. But you can work. We work with them, we Europeans. I even brought the president of the European Union. I didn't bring her by myself, but we did bring her to speak in the Knesset in a moment of grace. And she spoke, President Metzola. And she spoke about the relation of Europe with Israel. It was really a momentous moment. And we have signed peace deals with Egypt and with Jordan. And we have enlarged it in the Abraham Accords. And we're even talking about enlarging it to Saudi Arabia. And even Pakistanis are approaching. I've been approached by Pakistanis for several years now. And we have had incredible relations with India. We have been, so what happened is, in some respect, and the Palestinian issue seemed to be not subsiding, but the Israelis who were divided on the peace in the 1990s between the Oslo supporters and non-Oslo were awakened to the stream of suicide bombers in the second Intifada, and many of them said, I'm not peace schmees. They cannot control themselves. They are murderers. We deal with it differently with Sharon. And we deal with them differently meant that the Israelis said, okay, we will have to work it out, but we don't have any visions which are not realistic. Israelis are realistic. This is what it is. Now, suddenly, the idea of the enemies, as Uzi describes it, and Uzi even tells us that remember we said, from top down, they are somewhat in Egypt, or reconstructing their own kind of like, not to hate the Jews as they did in books. When I went to the European Union, we worked on Palestinian books in schools of hating the Jews, and we secretly doing work, the European passed against this and sanctioned it. Not that the Europeans are saints, but they did. We started to work. So lo and behold, this is coming now to the point with the demography in Israel, the structural shifts in Israel. 26% of Israeli first graders, I'm sitting on the Committee of Education in the Knesset. I was in charge in the Knesset on the Subcommittee for Higher Education, deeply involved. 26% are ultra-Orthodox kids. So where Israel is going, people are asking. Where the budgets will go. How Israel will look like. What will be the shades and colors of the home? We have a home, but how are we going to paint the walls? Are painting the walls is something minimum, or are painting the walls, maybe the walls will collapse on us, as people will say? These are big questions that will redefine Zionism itself, that will redefine the character of the State of Israel, that will redefine the very essence of our idea of security, and we see it now. What security and where this security stops? Tough question to ask, and not everybody likes when questions are asked, but if they're not asked, you're stupid. They always have to be told openly and discussing it with the world. Discuss it. Not out of weakness, out of openness to what we are, not hiding it. The Israelis, of course, and the Jews have many definitions to themselves. And they didn't define yet the final boundaries, even in the question of the Judea and Samaria. And I come from a right-wing party. But we come from a liberal right-wing party as opposed to people who are more religious. We are for more separation of religion and state. I'm not a member of a party. I'm not an activist member. I was kind of like the leader of the party that I served in the Knesset. Mr. Avigdor Lieberman just took me. I was his advisor when he was the foreign minister, and he said, come to the Knesset. I said, okay, fine. It's an opportunity. Why not? So I was not kind of a political activist. I was not running for... but these are big issues to be discussed. And they will define more than anything else the sense of our enemies, how weak we are, how powerful we are. This will define anti-Semitism into the future. If Israel, God forbid, is weak and perceived to be weak internally, others may be emboldened. And the diaspora, it reverberates. Because what is the relations of the diaspora to Israel? And we had the chok of the national law. Outside the state, but inside the nation. But what type of a nation this? And we have in Israel, however, inside the state, but outside the nation. We have the Druze fighting alongside the Israeli Jews, shedding their blood, and then they are not part of the nation. And they protest. Said, how come you have passed the national law? Why you passed it without including us? Is this an exclusionary law? Are you a racist? I'm not talking about Arabs who do not serve by law also. Lots of questions like that. Because everything is now, I think, concentrating on the sovereignty. The sovereignty of the Jews were always informing everything the Jews have done in history. When the Jews had sovereignty, it emanates. I write in my book about the Second Temple era and the time of sovereignty, how everything stemmed from Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a magnet for the diaspora. Everything, Jerusalem was the magnet, the powerful magnet. Of course, the First Temple era is not, the data is not, we don't have the data as much, and I'm not going to go into interpretations, but it's clear, when a sovereign state is strong, it's like when Armenia. Armenia was not a strong state. I was working with Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenia under Kocherian is different than Armenian under Petrosyan initially, because Dashnak party in the diaspora was much stronger initially when Armenia was created than the Armenian state in Yerevan. But when the Armenia will be strong, Armenia will speak on behalf of Armenians. And the question is, who speaks on behalf of the Jews and with what authority? Israel speaks on behalf of the Jews and with authority. You will give me one Jew, one, I'm not saying one Jew in the world that speaks on behalf of the Jews. Even Charles is not. One Jew outside Israel who can speak on behalf of the Jews. One Jew. In the past, I used to do studies. I say, who is your Jewish role model in the diaspora? So Elie Wiesel was the last one. He was also the founder of this organization, right? I saw. And Elie Wiesel, because he represented the Holocaust, the calamity of the Jews, and he spoke as a moral Jew in the world. And Reagan called on him. Remember the big debate on Reagan visiting PEMBROKE and so on. But Elie Wiesel died. So tell me one single Jew that American Jew will say, oh, he's my role model. Maybe Seinfeld, I don't know. No, think about it. Here I give you 10 minutes to think about it. You come with nothing. In the past, you had Rabbi Heschel, Rabbi Kaplan, you had writers, you had even, and as I write about, even American Jewish literature concentrating on the Israeli side, for good or ill, doesn't matter. This Israelization process of Jewish identity has been incredibly powerful. So this is fascinating phenomenon. And the Jewish organization, of course, were organizing and getting power. If it's AIPAC, if it's the AJC, if it's all the organizations, if it's the Taglit, whatever it is, around Israel. Israel is the magnet for Jewish organizations and power and so on and so forth. Because it's tough to keep the communities intact abroad without it. It's tough. So in this context, Zionism was the key factor on fighting anti-Semitism on the past. But the essence of Zionism and the definition of Zionism into the future will be the issue of defining the Jewish people into the future. Undoubtedly. No other issue can define them. It doesn't mean the Jews will not remain in various places, will pray to God and so on. Until modernity, the Jews were known, Ayudim nod'u betoratam, they know by the Torah. In the modernity, it's not that they knew by the Torah only, they knew by the sovereignty, by the state, by their achievement in modernity. When you go to Museum Anu in the Diaspora Museum, you see the parade of Jewish modernity. In Israel today, massive forces in Israel are objecting to modernity. I'm not talking objecting to secularism, to democracy, to liberal, objecting to modernity. They see modernity. They want lahzir atara leyoshna, to restore the old glory, while objecting to modernity, to the place of women, of what we do, to the study of a certain modernity. We have a big struggle in Israel. And it doesn't matter where you sit. It's a big struggle. It's a huge struggle. Because Jewish modernity is a completely different story. It has variation, how much tradition it injects into it. And the Sephardic Jews or Mizrahi Jews helped the Israelis to inject more tradition into the modern conceptual understanding of secularism, what Zionism came with. This is a very important moment, therefore. So we are at Oxford, far away from the arena. I said, what a relief. Coming out of Tel Aviv, was you don't sleep at night for so many months. Everybody doesn't sleep. Doesn't mean in which side you are on the debate. You just don't sleep. So what will happen here? What, we are crazy? What, we are crazy? So in that respect, this is a very important discussion to be dealt with on Zionism and anti-Semitism. Now, all of the above doesn't preclude what was said before in any fashion. What Charles was talking about, what we heard here on Nazi Germany, all of this remaining. And sometimes it only waits for a moment to explode again, right? It doesn't mean that Islamic jihadists are going to sleep. They hate you to their core. And give them an opportunity, they come to swallow you. The crazy Christian right will hate you. The leftist progressives with their notion this will hate you because of cosmopolitanism. Doesn't matter. They hate you. Now, how much they will be able to hate you and affect global affairs? That's the big question. Do they really affect global affairs? Or the powerful Israel plus the diaspora, which is normalized, has been kind of like a good answer to that. But undoubtedly, the power will inform the Jewish, because anti-Semitism, I'm done, anti-Semitism, I measure myself nicely, see. Anti-Semitism was really the disease of the lack of power. It doesn't mean that it doesn't come with power. BDS, we have power, they try to undermine it. When they say Zionism is racism in the United Nations in 1975, they try to undercut us. They try to bring evil, sinister criticism of Israel. Okay. I'm not saying okay in the sense that accepting it. So we fight them. As I said, we fight them. We don't accept it. We fight them tooth and nail. We fight them. With the diaspora, with the organization, with help of non-Jews. We fight them. But the big question is, how do you reconcile our own debate? What do we do in defining ourselves? What will happen? And I'm not trying to tell you which side, what will happen, because I really don't know. We are in uncharted territory. This never happened. Never happened in that respect. So I leave it to you, and thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Yossi. So a lot of questions. So, Professor Kohlbrenner.
So first of all, thank you. That was such an amazing and wide-ranging presentation. The only thing I would just say one correctly, and I think it's not only the ultra-Orthodox, a community in which I once identified, and my children still do identify in some way. It's not only ultra-Orthodox who have been traumatized by the Holocaust. I think as a historian, you really brought out the extent to which the Korban, the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, decisive. And if you look at the rabbis of the early Second Temple period, all of their work is reflected by what Yossi talks about, exile and trauma. And Jews, Israelis especially, not only on the right, all of us are in that state of continued trauma. Modernity has not been kind to anyone. The ultra-Orthodox are like in Noah's Ark, protecting themselves, not letting anything in. Without going into the very complex situation in Israel right now, I think part of the problem with progressives in Israel right now, which I consider myself one, is that there is a notion that the progressive Judaism is somehow independent from the Orthodox Judaism. And without going into that, I think this is really an ISGAP point, is Jews have survived over the centuries because disagreement has always meant to be continued. Disagreement hasn't meant I want to kill you. And in a certain sense, what's happened in Israel, which is so dangerous, is that the dynamics of Trump's America, left and right, the codependency of two sides fighting against each other, has been brought into Israel. And I think one of the things that's important about ISGAP, that we're all united, this is Yossi's point really, we're all united together, even in our disagreement, in fighting anti-Semitism. So thank you, Yossi.
Thank you very much. As you were talking about the changes in demographics and the importance of the IDF for the security of Israel, it made me wonder, is there any future? Because the Orthodox won't fight. And I went to they have a solidarity conference every November, and I went to the Solidarity Conference, and there was somebody from the Knesset arguing with somebody from one of the Arab parties, and they were screaming at each other, and the woman from the Knesset said, so you won't serve in the army, so do service. And the woman from the Arab party would refuse to talk about why they won't do service. So if you can't have that, and the Orthodox won't serve in the IDF, is there any future?
Look, first of all, Orthodox is a Orthodox is a broad term. There are many Jewish Orthodox religious Zionists, of course, serving in the army in large numbers, and there are many people also on the question of the Haredi, what we call Haredi, are also serving. 87% do not serve, or doesn't matter. But we don't know. These are processes that have to take place. I can tell you the discussions we had in the last Knesset. It's not just serving in the army. It's about modernity. In the last Knesset, and this is because this is something that is close to my heart, lots of negotiations about core curriculum, what you study. There's no secular studies. You don't study math, you don't study English, you don't study computer science. So we wanted to encourage this, what we call, in addition to what we call core studies of Zionism, of course not. And we had a negotiation with the Rebbe from Belz. The Rebbe from Belz represent 15% of the ultra-Orthodox community in the Knesset. They have a member of Knesset named Chaver Knesset, member of Knesset Eichler. And we, the minister of, the finance minister, the education minister, what's her name, Shasha Biton, I was facilitating. We went to the Rebbe and we closed 6,000 shekels for each Talmid, each student, because they're studying, men and women are separated, of course, in the yeshiva, to study course curriculum. This government came and immediately erased it, because the ultra-Orthodox much stronger, those who are much more sect, doesn't want this integration. Now, how it will be, I don't know, uncharted territory. In my opinion, it can go either way. I don't have questions. People ask me, I don't have answers. I have questions. I don't have answers. I am a student not only of diaspora politics. I've studied for years regime transitions all over the world. I've written books about regime transitions. I wrote 2 volumes called Between States about transitions to democracy from South Africa to Latin America to the Southern Cone, all the way to Afghanistan, to Namibia, you name it. And I did it for running on this. And I was studying civil wars. As a scholar I'm talking about. One should never underestimate. You know, we say the sky's the limit. One should never underestimate how deep is the abyss. Israelis, as someone in Washington told me, have a death wish. I'm telling you this, as they say, no hiding. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, you don't know where to stop. We don't know where to stop. I don't know. The political echelon has to stop. How we will do it. Not everything fixes itself. So when you ask me the structural question, what will happen to serving? Right now we're very concerned, not about whether the ultra-Orthodox will serve or not. This will be the military, to bring cohesion, to feel this sense of brotherhood, to feel this sense of kinship ties. So we know, if God forbid Arabs, Hezbollah, or this will attack us, we will all be on the borders. But the fact that we are scratching the epidermis, the very basic ties that we have, and injuring them, this is what bothers many Israelis. Can we repair it? The sense of kinship, with all the variation, that you're ready to die for this. People say, I'm not ready to die for you anymore. I will not. This is going to be dangerous. So this is a moment of truth that we don't know how it will be. Anyone who tells you that he or she knows, I will say, okay, good luck. But I certainly don't know. As for the structural issues, whether they will serve or not, it's one of the issues. For example, there will be something which will explode quickly now. There is a law propagated by the ultra-Orthodox parties that will enshrine the fact that they will not go to the army, but will be compensated as those who will go to the army. I can tell you, if this law will pass, the country will go in flames. I can tell you, it will go in flames. I speak to the people all over. So this is the law that they're proposing. This is the next law when the session is continuing. Because right now they're power hungry. They think they can pass any laws. 136 laws they put on the table. And it's not because I'm from the opposition. It's not, believe me. I negotiate with all of them. I can be on all sides because I told you I'm not kind of a lefty. They say, oh, he's a left or this or that. No, on the contrary. You know, I'm someone, who could be serving under Bibi. He asked me even. So what? In the past. I'm telling you, it's a question of debate that people have to weigh in and show leadership. Israel is now lacking leadership. Lacking leadership. To say, okay, I take this ship. We need a captain and say, okay, let's take the ship, relax a bit, see all these issues, which are very difficult issues. I'm not saying these are, but let's see. We don't want, God forbid, to undermine the sovereign moment that we have. and to be speaking, like almost wishful thinking about that we will again go into exile. In my book, I wrote that it's not a possibility. Just in order to justify my book, I want this peace. I don't want my book to be, obsolete before it sold 100,000 copies, right? This will be in itself a disaster.
I have a question. So, Yossi, so yesterday I was speaking about globalization and neoliberalism and how the states are becoming weaker and societies are fragmenting in this sort of postmodern age. So to what extent is Israel going through this process which is linked to kind of global economic, social, political, cultural processes associated with neoliberalism where the state is weakening, social cohesion and cultural identity is fragmenting? So are we, the Jewish people, so unique that we're out of this space and we don't understand or we're not connected to these processes which are affecting every society in the world that you can think of?
Look,
states are failing. The
Look,
United States is first world countries are fragmenting. So
I'm not a structuralist. I must disappoint you. I'm not a structuralist.
it's not a question of structuralism. There are global processes happening. And
This is structuralism. Structuralism is global processes and processes. I'm of the opinion the structures are very important and they're changing. But I'm also, as a political scientist, and I've written books, this is my approach. It's a scholarly approach. I'm a great believer in agency. In agency means players. Players come and players change. Not everything is it kind of like something which is uncontrollable. You can control certain things with agencies. Now, of course, there are structural shifts in the world. With China, as you described, with globalization.
And in Israeli society, the state.
The state in Israel, the national identity is not, the state has been shifting, as I said, because there is a growth in the state. It's not just a structure. There's a growth, population growth, economic growth. We have arrived last year to $50,000 GDP per capita. This is unheard of. This year, because of the crisis, we're going to dwindle to 40,000. This will be a huge decline of 20,000 of 20%. Because of what? Because of our inner fighting. Investment in high tech in Israel dropped 68% in the last 7 months. Because of what? You ask yourself, why? So we are right now injuring ourselves, and that happened to many people individually and otherwise. But as I always tell to my kids, you don't have to go to meltdowns in order to build. Leave some bricks intact in order to build again. You have it in personal relations, you have it in divorce, you have it in every case. You can really go down into depression and go down and destroy yourself. No, it's not a good solution to anything. At least I don't like such solutions. Some people love it and say, okay, let's go to chaos and then we'll see what will happen. Okay, good luck. I'm not, but I say agency is important. Now, we are not immune to the changes you describe. We're not immune. But at the same time, we are retracting also. We're retracting to lots of populations that are completely detached from these processes or objecting to them. And we have issues at stake. We have not settled the issue of the Judea and Samaria. We have not settled this. We have not settled this. Can we settle it? I'm not sure. But we have not settled this. What will happen there? Who will control? Structural issues relate. Who is in control in the government? Is it Smotrich or Gantz on what is happening? The very fact, and this is outrageous, but it's a fact of yesterday's big news in Israel. Outrageous, but this is the fact. This is the news, all over the news. That the spokesperson of the army, the official spokesperson, will say that Jewish terrorism is endangering the state of Israel. Jewish terrorism, he said. He didn't say Palestinian terrorism. People say, oh, gee, what's going on here? Now, we know what Palestinian terrorism is. We know what Hamas is all about. We know the enemies. But, how much we know ourselves, how far we can go, what will happen with the security forces. This is something that I'm bothered. I never bothered about the enemies. I know them. I never give them good grades. Never. In my class, they are either failing or failing big time. They hate the Jews, we know. It's very clear. There is clarity. Us versus them is clear. Think about it. The us versus them was all about Zionism. The nation state defined itself in two ways. Us versus them, as Carl Schmitt, the German, would have it in wartime. Me and my enemy. This is what it's all about. And of course, in the modern time, the political scientists would have it sort of like the idea of the allocation of values. What Max Weber would have, the legal rational state. The legal rational state can run itself. It's like the legality, it's the economy. You don't need leaders. Who knows who is the leader of Denmark? You have any idea who is the leader of Denmark? It's not a quiz, but let's make it a quiz. No, it doesn't matter. Danish economy runs. There's no us versus them. There is no fights over there. But us versus them is critical when you have outside enemies, when you have power. And in Israel, the balances have shifted in a certain fashion. Now, whether it's the structural issues of the world, I'm sure we are affected by what is happening, by ideology, by exposure, but we still retain an amazing degree of patriotism, the Israelis, and an amazing degree of cohesion because of the family structure. Israel is a small country, relatively, geographically. People are still celebrating Friday night dinners, which is quite an amazing phenomenon. So they keep the community intact. They are not globalists. Even those who are high-tech people, as I write about them in my book, they are high-tech people representing Israel. They're always there for Israel. There's like this network of Israelis. You see Israelis, traveling wherever. My daughter is now, who knows where she is, doing yoga in Panama. She said, where are you doing yoga? All of us Israelis. We just have Shabbat dinner. So it's very interesting. In Brazil, you have Shabbat dinner. Here you have Chabad this. This is where they are. They're running in herds. They kind of like they love the country. They are attached to they have passion, and passion is important for patriotism. But they also know how to hate each other with passion.
She was waiting for one final.
Excuse me, I see who's. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is a slightly different question. From our perspective in dealing with anti-Semitism and the connection with anti-Zionism, like in New Zealand, I would say anti-Zionism is probably one of the major forms of anti-Semitism. The thesis you've sort of promoted about this notion of power, that is the very reason that Israel is hated in New Zealand, is because they're seen as powerful and that they're oppressing Palestinians who are the underdogs. I don't know if you know that too, or the oppressed. And so the narrative that you have as Israelis, which I love Israelis, love Israel, I love that narrative, but it's like in order to deal with anti-Semitism in New Zealand, we need a different narrative, because the narrative of power, it just feeds more anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
One thing I can tell you, whatever we will do, will not do to adjust ourselves to New Zealand.
I understand that.
Believe me. Whatever I come to Canada. I'm not saying to you. I come to Canada. I meet in Canada. I said we have to meet with also not only the supporters of Israel. We come to them. We go into the room. I said, okay, what's your story? I said, what's your story? Look, you're not kind to Palestinians. I said, you know where they dwell? You know what Palestinians are? Look, we don't know. You know what the boundaries are. You know what the questions are. I said, look, I will go to Quebec and I'll tell you that you are such and such. It will be irresponsible. There is a question that is ongoing question. How the New Zealanders and how those who are telling stories in New Zealand, or how those who are telling stories in South Africa, when I go to South Africa, and are basically telling me it's apartheid, it's apartheid, it's apartheid. I said, what do you know? You have hijacked the concept that you have self-thrived on, apartheid, with the struggle against racist regime in South Africa, which I was involved in the transition, in the Codessa talks, and I was supporting in the Codessa talks, I was involved deeply, and I wrote the whole thing about evening the score and so on, and you are superimposed it on the state of Israel without knowing anything. The fact that there are some whatever useful idiots among yourselves talking about it and bringing in the colonial theory and this and telling you, and this is propagated also in the media, doesn't mean that this is how it is. Now, should we fight it? We should fight this anti-Semitism in New Zealand. I agree. And you and your significant other and your husband, I'm sure, fighting it very well. But is this kind of a priority of the Israeli Foreign Ministry? No, it's not. I can. I'm as far as someone who served an Israeli foreign minister, was going all over the world. It's not. Now, is this a problem when we are having in Europe? Yes. Is this a problem if we will have it in America? Yes. Are we hated in places like in China? We're not. We're not hated in India. I was in Gujarat now. Now, it doesn't mean that we take lightly because Israel loved to be loved. So, and I always said I said about the Arabs, the Arabs have made a huge mistake historically hating the Jews. Think about it, any Arab who declared that they love us and ready to make peace with us, we're immediately ready to make love to them. Think about it. Anyone who declared that they loved us and ready, Sadat come to Jerusalem, goodbye, we love you, goodbye. If Assad would have come, we would have been without the Golan Heights, I can assure you. If only the stupid would come, if only Arafat would know how to make peace with Israel and sign the Oslo Agreement and say, no war anymore, we will never do this, we will do it, you will see Israelis say, fine, we love, and immediately they will be friends and we'll go to think about it. In one day, we opened up to the Abraham Accord, no room on any flights to Dubai or to Abu Dhabi. More Israelis in Abu Dhabi than in Jerusalem. I mean, think about shopping. Israelis are suckers for love. I'm telling you, because they were kind of a pariah state they felt. So I'm not saying that we can solve anything. I'm not, and I really have no idea about New Zealand. I'm not saying it condescendingly, on the contrary. I just don't know. But it cannot be a priority. And to say that Israel's power, what do you think? Okay, Israel will be weak. We're going to be softy.
Well, it's not really about that. It's about the narrative.
The narrative, we cannot change the narrative. The narrative is all about power. They should know that we are powerful. I do not hide the narrative of power. On the contrary, I heighten the narrative of power. No, I was in Denmark. I can tell you. I was in Denmark. I was sent to Denmark. I was invited to Denmark, University of Roskilde. Roskilde is just next to Copenhagen. I was one of the referees for a PhD. The guy wrote a PhD on the West Bank and so on. We had dinner after that. The minister of infrastructure came on a bicycle with his wife. She came with a car. And they said to me, I'll never forget it. I said, so how are you? We sit over dinner. And she said to me, so what do you think? I said, fine. I said, how many kids do you have? I said, I have a son who is in the army. He said, in the army? I said, yes, he's in the army and I'm very proud of it. I said, you're proud of it? I said, of course I'm proud of it. He does what he has to do. And she said, there was a debate. I said, what do you think if there will be missiles from next to Roskilde on into Copenhagen? You'll be proud, or will you be giving me lectures? So those who hosted me said, Professor Shain, you better take a taxi. I said, I know, I'll take a taxi. Goodbye. Okay, so Denmark will be people in Roskilde will think that we talk power. It's not that we are arrogant about power, but in our neighborhood, as Ehud Barak would say, when there is, and he coined the term, villa in the jungle. When you think in the villa in the jungle, you speak like in New Zealand. I'm not saying New Zealand, they are not good, but you think about those kind of like the niceties of the lovey-dovey kumbaya society. Okay, but this is not it. We don't live in kumbaya society. We live in a neighborhood, you have to be strong. And in the neighborhood you have to be strong, you better be strong.
So we have one more question. I'll just say, let me speak for a second. Also, I agree with Uzi. I think the
Uzi is not me, Yossi.
Yossi, sorry.
It's good to know that I'm here.
Yossi. So I think it's also putting in historical context New Zealand. I'll just say very quickly that there was a man named Sir Francis Bondhead. Do you know who Sir Francis Bondhead is? That's part of your history. That's your history. Sir Francis Bondhead was in charge of the Dominion countries of the Commonwealth, or of the Empire, of New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and South Africa. And Sir Francis Bondhead created the reservation system in the Dominion countries. And General Smuts and Verwoerd went to Canada to see what the Canadian, or the British people in what is now Canada, how they created reservation systems for the indigenous people. And Verwoerd and Smuts, the architects of apartheid, went back to South Africa to create the Bantu stance. Same thing happened in Australia, same thing happened in New Zealand. So the staggering magnitude of British colonialism, forget the Belgian colonialism, the French colonialism, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the enslavement, right? We can go on and on. 85% of the world's landmass was controlled by these colonial settlers at one point. So I think the New Zealanders have a lot of their own issues to deal with and to put things straight in their own history and to deal with their problems. And it's fascinating that the descendants of European colonialism and the civilizing process will now focus on the Jew, the strong Jew, finally the strong Jew, finally, thank God, the strong Jew, right? That we have become the incarnation of the white supremacist colonial apartheid, the hypocrisy and the ahistorical anti-Semitism. To me, it's mind-boggling. And the longer you repeat a lie, people, I guess, start to believe it. But it's a lie. And the New Zealanders and the Canadians, we have our own homework to do, in my humble opinion. Anyway.
And that was my point. I think that what Dr. Trotter is bringing to the table is not just in New Zealand, it's pervasive.
For
and
sure.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And the problem isn't so much for Israelis, it's diasporic.
Yes,
problem
I agree.
Because people are being hurt.
Yeah.
Because of the perception now of all Jews as all powerful, all white, all wealthy, all oppressors. Now people are being attacked for being Jewish.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yep.
Right? So this isn't your problem, it's ours.
Yeah.
And here we are looking for solutions to fight back and to say that, well, we have power now and now you see us as oppressors and that's hypocritical. Go study is not going to help.
But let me just one more. First of all, this is a
We
very
have
important.
2 minutes, and then we have to
Okay,
have coffee.
this is coffee is much more important than anti-Semitism. Much more. Think about it. Can people survive without coffee? No. Without anti-Semitism, they can bear it. But it's a joke. But in any case, I think what you make a point is a very important point. There is what we call over here and over there. I write about it in my books on diasporas. The fact that the diaspora, things that are happening in Israel and the issues are reverberating abroad, doesn't mean that we have to be indifferent to them. On the contrary, we have to be, and we have a minister of diaspora. The fact that our minister of diaspora is an idiot is a different story. That the ADL, head of the ADL, called Netanyahu and said, the minister of diaspora, this is what happened 2 weeks ago. Abe Foxman calls Netanyahu, right to Netanyahu, and said, fire the minister of diaspora because he hates the Jews. This is what he calls. Now, this is a different story. It's internal politics. It's indeed the case when the anti-Semitism, as Charles makes the point, that is generated and blame the Jews for over being powerful and using their minority status by sort of adjusting it to what their story of Israel power, as you say, sort of like that this is oppressive power, whatever, is a problem. Now, who can solve it? It's a big question. I don't have an answer. Who can solve it? Because what does it mean solving it? Many Jews in the diaspora, in France, in England, and so on, and many places, were injured by it. Sometimes badly injured by the narrative, or by the narrative from the right, because they are cosmopolitans. Like when you have an assassination, like you had in Pennsylvania, it didn't come from the it can go from either side. The leadership of the Jewish people abroad, whether they can deal with it or not, I don't know. You have some people who are active in this. The state of Israel has been active in defending the diaspora in its own ways. For example, and I'm not telling a secret, it's in my book, so it's already covered everything. The Israeli security agency for ages defended diaspora communities against terrorist activities. We have been injured in Argentina. We have been injured in France. We've been injured in the United States. We've been in many places Jews were attacked. And we consider the kinship ties. Israel has by law, we have the 13th clause in the penal code of Israel that anyone who harmed Jews because they are Jewish are enemies of the state of Israel. Extraterritorial law. And I cannot tell you how we act when needed to be acting because it's not always simple, this business. We had it in Mumbai, we had it in many places. Now, how to change the narrative, how to change the atmosphere. And I was on campuses, I run on campuses in this country and many countries for decades against BDS, fighting it tooth and nail, sometimes with bodyguards running. And as a professor at Georgetown, all over the place. Believe me, I've been in numerous campuses. Lately at Berkeley and so all over the place. I'm not saying you have to do the work. You have to do the work. We have been better at that. You have to mobilize the forces. You know, organizations in America are quite mobilized. The World Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, David Harris, who's now vice president here, is a brilliant activist on this issue. Many. To tell you that you can solve it because of saying to Israel, please behave differently. You know, could you please, because I'm
Well, I'm not proposing.
but the question is what? What needs to be done? This is a big question that is over there. It's not over here, the point I'm talking about.
Okay, and then Yossi, thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of food for thought.